playing for the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's go.
I really like this setup here, guys. I really like this setup. I do. We got two from Seattle and a Salt Lake. We got a Salt Lake in the house now. All we need now is like a Toad Suck, Arkansas, Joe. We need a weird town. We got a couple Seattle, Salt Lake. How about a Toad Suck? And we'll be set here on the show. Maybe then will be interesting. Jason Churchill here with Joe Doyle. We'll explain the Salt Lake thing next week. But yes, it's true. There is a such thing as Toad Suck, Arkansas. It's a real.
That sounds
place.
like an OnlyFans account.
It's well, hey, how do you know what I'm doing in my free time, Joe? Like you don't know, man.
Can we?
No, like that's a real thing. It was how the locals described steamboat captains back in the day, because they'd tie up their boats on the Arkansas River. They'd wait for the water to rise to the right depth, and while they did, they would just drink up all the liquor, and the locals would say they're sucking it up and swelling up like a toad. So toad suck. True story. I will not apologize for telling the truth. I just won't do it.
That's lovely.
You got nothing else because it's pretty weird. All right, Joe. Now that you're a little bit smarter than you were 60 seconds ago, what do you want to do today? I got some ideas, but you want to talk baseball? How's that?
Let's do a whole CWS episode for different reasons.
Yeah, we kind of sort of can do that. Yeah, the Chicago White Sox is the first thing on the agenda. They've had an interesting offseason. They made a few trades, few decisions, let some players go. But to date, they've yet to do anything I think really anyone would consider large, like fairly significant, but nothing huge really in either direction, sending players out or bringing players in. We'll go over that today. We'll talk about our favorite under the radar free agent signings. And there's a lot of places we can go here too, which is going to be fun. So I got a couple. I'm sure Joe has a couple. Also, because Joe updated his 2024 draft boards earlier in the week. Was that earlier in the week or was that last week, Joe?
I'm losing track.
It's been a long week. It has been a long week. But what I want to do is I want to see where your opinions and your place on some of these players and where you sit on some of these players and the draft as a whole. If there are some things there where for you and for maybe the rest of the industry, they just don't match up, whether it's an individual player or it's the class or it's the strength of a class, weakness of the class, whatever that is, there's got to be a couple of things that are really interesting right now where you're just in one place and it seems like most everyone else is in another. So we got a week until the D1 season starts. Thought that'd be an interesting conversation for this week. Before we get started, a couple of quick reminders. Speaking of the website, futurestarseries.com. If you want to know which college prospect handles the breaking ball the best, or which college prospects handle the breaking ball the best, it's basically where art thou breaking ball murderers, right? If that's your question, that's what you're asking, head to futurestarseries.com because Joe Doyle has the answers to that. And also next week, I'm going to start dropping Joe's team by team top 30s, and we're starting with the American League West. And if you want the whole schedule, we're going to go American League West, NL East, then the two central divisions, which are not snorefests, by the way, at all. Those are two very interesting divisions from a farm system and prospect standpoint. And then we'll close it out with the American League East and the National League West. The White Sox, Joe. The damned White Sox. I said it, the damned White Sox, because I actually commend Chris Getz here. He takes over as GM. They make all those wholesale changes. They were 61 and 101 last year. We all could see it coming. But it doesn't really make the kind of sense. Their off season so far, it doesn't really make the kind of sense that I expected it to make. You get new leadership, the bad season, a lot of mid-tier contracts on that roster. There's really not what I think anyone would really call a young core, a good young core there at this point. They're not very deep. There's not a lot of impact. They basically have 2 all-stars in Dylan Cease and Luis Robert Jr. What did they declined options on Liam Hendricks and Tim Anderson? And after the trade deadline last year, I think this is important as well. They did get Jake Eater for Jake Berger, which I loved.
Yeah.
Kendall Graven for Corey Lee, Lance Lynn and Joe Kelly for a couple of minor league arms. The Giolito and Ronaldo Lopez deal to the Angels. What was that? Kai Bush and Edward Caro.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
a really interesting deal too, right?
I mean, listen, this has gone from a back third of Major League Baseball farm system to probably somewhere in the 12 to 16 range. And it's
Mm.
not like they've added impact. Like there's not a lot of high ceiling guys that I see that they've acquired, but I loved that Jake Eater deal.
Oh,
One
man.
man, one of the things so that was the name that everybody was talking about after the 2022 draft. That was like, I think it seems to me in talking with scouts and front office folks that everybody in the industry thought that they were going to have a shot at him in like the 4th or 5th or 6th round because he'd been hurt and he didn't
Mm.
perform, and the Marlins scooped him up quick and fast, and he was a big topic in trades. Yeah, I mean he's the type of guy that I think you take a shot on. Lefty up to 96 from the left side, 3 pitches. But it's not just Eater. I mean, they've added Nick Nastrini, Edward Quiro. Who else have they had? Dom Fletcher, who I'm sure we'll talk about. Prelander Baroa, Kai Bush.
Taking some shots at Mike Soroka.
Shane Rohan, Mike Soroka. Yeah, Mike Soroka, they're going to give a shot to.
Jared Schuster in that same
Schuster
deal.
was the other one. Yeah, I mean, listen, like they probably don't have I don't think there's a 3-win player anywhere in all of those players, but I think you might have a stable of guys with a shot to become 2-win guys. And that's the way that you fill out the back end of a competitive big league roster. Now they're at least a year away from being able to turn the page and kind of change their approach, but they've gotten a lot of value out of the assets that they've moved.
Where did they miss? And we didn't talk about this beforehand, but where did that organization under Ken Williams and under Rick Hahn, where did they miss? What was the big issue there? Was it just the Eloy Jimenez and the Yohan Moncadas of the world? They didn't give them tons of money, but they gave them some money, and they got hurt and only provided value when they were on the field, of course, and they didn't get their money's worth in general. And they're just, I don't know. It seems like there were some names there, and it seemed like a lot of stuff was lining up for them to get pretty good, and then it just didn't happen. I mean, is this in large part due to? I mean, and I promise you, I'm not bringing up the draft just because it's you, but did the White Sox miss too much in the draft over the last 5, 6, 7 years for last year's team to be any good and for, this coming season to be in good shape and for them to get to the point where they're changing the entire front office and bringing in Chris Getz to run things?
I don't think so. I don't think this was a draft situation. I look at it like they were good in 20, they were pretty good or on the come up in 21, and then it just fell apart. And it's fallen apart for a number of reasons. I mean, clubhouse culture has been an issue. Coaching player relationship has been an issue. But I think, Tim Anderson falling apart was a huge issue, and his injuries. Like you look at it, like maybe we put too much stock in a team that was built from the outside in, because so much of the White Sox value in 20 and 21 came from, first base and corner outfield, and they had some good starters, but Jose Abreu was one of their best players, and Eloy Jimenez is a DH. He's one of their best players, and like mind you, Tim Anderson at his best was a top. I mean, he's a fantastic hitter, but he's probably a top 10 shortstop in the league, top 8 shortstop in the league, and Luis Robert has always been a dynamic center fielder, but they were getting so much. They were trying to expel so much value out of right field and DH and first base. Maybe it's a testament to teams that are built up the middle on, to the outside. I don't know. Tough. And Andrew Vaughn too. Can you answer this? Because I don't know what happened. They ended up with 5 DHs on their team, and I don't really know how we got here.
I mean, that's just bad roster construction. We've seen a lot of this, and we kind of know how this works. I think the Philadelphia Phillies are the perfect example. If you want to overcome what otherwise would be bad roster construction by having like 3 DHs on your team and being below average defensively at far too many spots, you have to be really, really good on the mound, and you have to be really, really good at the plate. You just have to be like top 5-ish in those two areas, and you can make up for the fact that your defense kind of sucks. But it's really difficult and expensive to do that. Look at all the money Philly has done to get where they are with Bryce Harper and Trey Turner, and spending, 15, 20, $25 million on short-term deals for guys like Kyle Schwarber, and obviously all the money on their rotation. So it's, the White Sox don't spend that way. I do look at the draft and say they've really struggled to get, at least in the first round, they've really struggled to get the kind of value that a team that wants to build their teams and spend the way that they want to spend, you have to do better than, Zach Birdie, Zach Collins, Jake Berger, Nick Madrigal, Andrew Vaughn. You have to do better than that
Garrett
in the first
Crochet.
round, and
You
Garrett
look at those
Crochet, if
two-
you're going to make him a reliever immediately, like if that's what you think of
Yeah.
him, then what are you doing? Like what you have to do better than that. And it's not like they took Crochet at like 28, Joe. They took him at 11.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to do better than that. Now, maybe they've hit the jackpot. Maybe with Colson Montgomery, we like Colson Montgomery, and maybe Jacob Gonzalez turns into be the guy that made the most sense at 15. But that pick also kind of reminds me of some of the picks. The Nick Madrigal pick at 4. Nick Madrigal's really your guy at 4 in any draft. I do think the draft is part of a pretty significant part of it, just because of the way they want to build their team.
I think the thing you said about Crochet there was right on the money. Where did they get him? 12? 10?
11,
They got
yeah,
him
the 11th pick,
11. Yeah, so here's
2017,
the thing.
yeah.
I can subscribe to the idea of a team taking a pitcher that they believe is going to contribute in their bullpen in the thrust of a competitive window at, like you said, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. And 2020 wasn't a good that was 2021, wasn't it? So
2020. It was the 2020 draft. Yeah.
it was 2020. So, like,
Mhm.
I get it. There wasn't a huge sample. Here's this tall, gangly lefty who's throwing 99, and but he had elbow issues, at Tennessee. So
Mhm.
there was that. But the biggest issue there was the White Sox came out and said, "We're going to start Garrett Crochet. We're going to treat him like a starter." He was in their bullpen within 3 weeks,
Yeah.
4
They thought
weeks
he was
in 2020.
another Chris Sale, and they forgot that they're actually two different people, and they're going to get two different results because they're two different people.
And then they didn't let him start in 21, and then he blew out. And I think his most valuable season was either 2020 or 2021 in a very abbreviated, um, showcase. And then to your
Mhm.
point, like I had totally forgotten about. I don't know how I'd forgotten about Nick Madrigal, but um, yeah, that single pick, I think, changed the draft. I genuinely believe that the Nick Madrigal pick single-handedly changed the draft for a huge segment of the industry. That nobody's going to make that quote unquote mistake again.
Mhm.
And the adoption of TrackMan on the college side of things has certainly helped uh, push those types of names down the board. Um, but yeah, and to your point, Jacob Gonzalez, like if you're going to take a college bat at 15 or 14 or wherever they took Jacob Gonzalez, um, you expect the guy to be one of the better producers right out of the gate. He was one of the worst bats to make their introduction to pro ball in the entire draft this year. So,
Not just the first
you have
round.
no, he was awful. He was terrible.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
if you're a White Sox member of their front office, that has to have you a little bit nervous. But I still believe in Jacob Gonzalez. Like I like the tools, I like the metrics. It's a good frame. Like I still believe he could be every bit of what Brooks Lee
But
has been
he's
for the
also
Twins, but not a good.
representative of the problem of that we're talking about.
Well, you hope that he's not representative of the problem, but at the same time, you
But
do look at some of the high school guys. You look at some of the high school guys
even if he
drafted
turns
behind
out to
Gonzalez.
be what you want him to be, though, like if you think Jacob Gonzalez is in the big leagues in a couple years, what's the ceiling there? You need to
I
get
mean,
more out of
he's
that.
probably
I
not
think
more
that's
than
the
a
idea.
3-win player. Yeah, I
Mhm.
and listen, that's what the White Sox have done. They've always seemed to be a team that has reached for floor rather than ceiling, for better or for worse. Colson Montgomery, ironically, as their top prospect, as a top 20 prospect in the game, was the biggest risk that they've taken.
Mhm.
And
And it
actually,
might
and
work. Might work.
I said this a month ago on this podcast. I wasn't out on Colson Montgomery as a high schooler, but I didn't see him as a top 15 pick or whenever they
Sure.
took him. They took
And
him
he was a
early.
little older at draft time, wasn't he?
Very
Yeah.
19.2, I think. So
Mhm.
I didn't get that pick. But my point is, and I think the point that you're making is they've gone for so many fast moving college performers that lack ceiling that I think it has kind of start to bite him in the ass a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think they thought they were okay because they had Moncada and he was young and they had him locked up. Tim Anderson was rolling. They had Eloy Jimenez locked up and he was young and he was hitting. And I think they thought they were in really good shape. And then they run into some injuries and then Andrew Vaughn doesn't really develop, at least not yet. It's not certainly not too late. And they're in a completely different spot at this point. They obviously didn't develop a whole lot of pitching. And that may have been their biggest downfall. But just in general, like we look at the Texas Rangers, they're not really developing a bunch of pitching right now, but they have so much development in general. They're able to just go get it. Even if they don't buy it, they're able to go trade for it like they did with Jordan Montgomery. So I actually expected this White Sox team this offseason, Joe, to use Dylan Cease, to use Luis Robert, and even Andrew Vaughn to some extent, to either push some contracts out the door if they could, to at least try. On Moncada's owed $25 million. Eloy Jimenez, I don't know what that number is. Kind of a lot. But it's not like $200 million. I thought they could have done that. Or, hey, go out and get as young and get as much young talent as you possibly can. And here we are with a week left until pitchers and catchers report. And that hasn't been the case. And I don't necessarily think it's wrong or bad. I think it's really interesting, Joe. It's like maybe Chris Getz is seeing this a lot differently than at least I was. I don't know what you were thinking of the White Sox offseason. I expected Dylan Cease to be gone by now. I expected to hear Luis Robert Jr. rumors and buzz at least. And we haven't heard, jack all about that. Like they're not even considering moving Luis. And I understand that. It's just a little weird because I expected the opposite. I don't know. How long can they do this? How long can they hang on to a Dylan Cease? Or are you telling me, hey, if they hang on to Cease, they might be able to be interesting next year? Are you telling me that at this point? Looking at that roster, looking at that order, can they compete next year in 2025?
I mean, it kind of speaks to the additions that they've made. Like if you subscribe to the idea that Luis Robert is a 6-win player and Blake Snell is a 5-win starting pitcher, he gets back, or not Blake Snell, excuse me, Dylan Cease gets back to being a 4.5, 5-win pitcher. Then you have two anchors. Now you got to find a way to
Mhm.
keep Dylan Cease around. But you have those anchors. All those pieces that we talked about, I don't think they're going to be valued contributors until 2026. But if they can act as a bedrock, a floor, and kind of let those ceiling guys carry the load, I think you could, especially in the Central. Like I think you could make the case that team could run into 85 wins. I do, not this year, not this
Mhm.
year. But I think in 2020, 2025, 2026, it's possible. But you look at it like this, like everybody that you just mentioned that they would want to try and move is coming off a bad year, is coming off their value is in the can. Like
Except
Dylan
Robert.
Cease,
Except Robert. He's the one guy.
except Robert, except
Mhm.
Robert. But you'd have to be blown away to move Robert. And if you're moving Robert, it would probably, like if you're moving Robert, you have to commit to moving Cease and you have to commit to moving Moncada and Jimenez and all those guys. You're going to get about 60 cents on the dollar right now. So maybe it's just a timing thing. I bet you it's one of these. Like Chris Getz probably looks at last trade deadline, July 31st, 2023, and he goes, the returns were unbelievable for
Mhm.
teams that were sellers. What if we position ourselves to be the seller in 2024? We keep all these pieces, and instead of getting 60 cents on the dollar for 3 or 4 of these guys, maybe we'll get $1.15 on the dollar and kind of hope that some of them bounce back. We just take that risk.
Yeah, even a Yohan Moncada can get you something at the deadline if he's relatively healthy, because you get to the deadline or even past, and instead of being owed 25 million, now he's owed like 10 or 11 late in July, early August, and splitting that and getting something for him becomes a realistic possibility. Now he hasn't played, hasn't performed. Yeah, you're right. You're getting nothing. What did you say? 60 cents on the dollar? You might be lucky to get 60 cents on the dollar
On
for Moncada
Moncada.
specifically. Yeah. And
I
that's a
think we
rough one,
mentioned this
25 million
last week.
bucks.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this last week. If you move Moncada now, I think you're eating $24 million. I think you're
Yeah.
paying down $24 million. If you want even a Jose Caballero kind of a return, which I
Mhm.
think is precisely, ironically, what the White Sox lack, is the middle of the diamond pesky. They don't have that.
Mhm.
And even to even get something like that with the ceiling of a 2-win player, you'd have to just you know, bite $24 million away from that contract to have anyone take it.
I also wonder, Joe, if Dylan Cease's season last year is actually the culprit for those talks not getting serious. Like maybe Chicago thinks and it wasn't like he was terrible last year, but he wasn't anywhere close to what he was still a 3.7 F4 arm
Yeah.
last year. But when you look at the runs allowed metrics, like his strikeout rate was down 3%, his walk rate still 10%. It was about the same. But just in terms of keeping the ball in the ballpark, got a little worse. His ground ball rate got a little worse. His hard hit rate against got a little worse. And hence all the runs allowed metrics going up like a half run. Now his ERA more than doubled, but his FIP, XFIP, xERA, things like that went up a half a run to a run and a quarter. So something was obviously different there. And if you dig into it, just a little bit, you'll notice that his curveball was just garbage. And maybe the White Sox are just thinking, we think he's going to get that back, and we think he's going to be closer to his 2022 version, or at least be his 2021 version, which was darn near as good as 2022. Trade him at the deadline, like he said. Like
Yeah.
maybe they think because Cease is going to be back to normal, and you get that frenzy at the deadline, maybe that's just the way to go with Dylan Cease, because it doesn't really sound like anybody got close to trading for Dylan Cease, does it?
No. No, I mean it sounds like the Orioles, for example, were like an entire top 50 prospect away, which in the grand scheme of making a trade is a big piece
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
Um I look at that White Sox team from last year and to a lesser extent 2022, and that was a systemic organizational failure. When the
Mhm.
entire team, when the entire team plays down, when the entire team plays to 60% of their upside, that speaks to organizational failure. And
A lot
I
of things going wrong.
a lot of things internally being broken. And I think you're going to see a lot of these players ending up in new places, getting back to old form. Like I'm surprised that Tim Anderson is still on the market because he was quite literally the best hitter. He won the batting title 2 years in a row, I think.
Mhm.
And he doesn't have a job after one down year. Um,
Yeah.
it's hard for me to believe what did he didn't homer until like June 20th or something. It was something insane.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to believe Tim Anderson isn't going to catch on somewhere and be, a solid, steady 2-win, fine, big time regular shortstop.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. What's he, 30 years old? So he's not that old. So unless those injuries just completely decimated something about what he does, particularly at the plate, you got to think he's got a chance to do something. I get the reservation about how often he's going to be available. Somebody's going to take a shot though. The White Sox, that offense, only one team in Major League Baseball scored fewer runs than did the White Sox last year, despite the fact that the Chicago White Sox play in my living room. That is how small that ballpark is. And that is how large my living room is now. Just
Wow.
awful, just terrible. They just had nothing going on offensively. I mean, the A's scored 585 runs. That's the only reason the White Sox weren't by far the worst offense in the league. And when you look at that rotation, um, the rotation was 24th. The bullpen was 26th. It was the 26th best pitching staff. They had nothing, absolutely
Their
nothing
defense was bad. Their
going for it.
defense was bad. I mean,
And I think they expected that. That's the scary part. They expected that. That's how they built the team.
I've got friends that live in Chicago and are White Sox fans by birth, and
Ooh.
I've been friends with them for 12 years, and last year was the first time where they said it wasn't even about how bad the team was. That team was dreadfully not fun to watch. They brought no energy to the field. There was no accountability. There was no pride or passion in the colors or, I guess, shades that you're wearing on your jersey. They that was a that I mean, to be a White Sox fan, and then people were shooting each other in the stands with weapons. There were
They were
women
they were
firing
they were
guns into their own chests
they were
because White
arguing
Sox. It was so bad.
over whether the problem was failed drafts or poor free agent activity.
Yeah.
That's
And then
what they were
Karen
shooting each other.
shot Sally with a gun that she snuck in her stomach rolls. This is not something that would have been approved at a Hollywood script reading.
Man, that is a scary thought, by the way. Scary thought.
Scary,
Wow, the
but
White Sox. You know, something we'll do
possible.
with spring training starting next week, something you and I have talked about doing, and it sounds like it might be a fun conversation, just to go division by division. So we'll do that. We'll start either next week or the week after. We'll just go division by division. We'll talk about the 6 divisions during spring training, because this American League Central, I don't know. It's really interesting to me. Kansas City's trying to do a little something here. Detroit's trying to make a little bit of a move here. And Cleveland and Minnesota have really not done a whole lot to make their team better for 2024. So while I got a little bit closer, the one team that's left out in the cold, the Chicago White Sox.
Yeah.
Oh boy, the American League Central. All right.
Man, what a flip on its head. Sheesh.
Yeah. Yeah. 100 losses. Yeah, I guess that'll get a GM fired and the president, for crying out loud. All right. Free agency. Still a thing. Here we are in February. We're just days from pitchers and catchers reporting. We have 5, I'd say 5 significant free agents that I can think of off the top of my head that are still on the market. Joe Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery, Matt Chapman, Cody Bellinger, and Jorge Soler is still out there. There have been dozens of signings, by the way. And we all talk about the Yamamotos and the Otanis, and sure, those are fun to talk about. But it seems every year this happens. We look back in June, July, August at the end of the year, and we say, man, what a great deal that was. What a great signing that was. And let's do that again. I was looking through this a little bit to see what might be a little bit of an underrated signing. And I landed, I don't know. I'm going to do one hitter and one pitcher. You could do it whichever way you want. Before I talk about this particular player, I'm going to throw out that Jamer Candelario is one of mine in a very, very strange and odd manner. But I'll explain that in a little bit. What's the guy that stands out for you the most in terms of underrated free agent signings this offseason?
I got 2 pitchers and I got a hitter. I'll start with one of the pitchers and we can go back and forth. For me, knowing what the Rays do and how they operate, getting Phil Maton on a 1 year, actually I think it's a 1 year with a club option for 25. $6 million deal. I think it's like 7 million for 2025. But I mean, that's an organization that understands how to build a bullpen and understands how to, provide a unique look to a hitter and provide different pitch shapes and provide different arm slots. And you bring in a guy like Phil Maton who throws frisbees and he's still only 30 years old. And at his best, I mean, what is that, a 70 slider when he's right?
Yeah.
I mean, when he's really right. Also, shout out to Phil Maton, 20th round pick. Nicely done, sir. No, I just think, like, if you look at the way that the Rays have found success over the years, it's acquiring unique looks like this. And I think Phil Maton is probably going to be, I'd be surprised if he didn't get back into his, 8th inning shutdown 2021, 2022 version immediately.
I'm surprised he lasted this long. I really am.
Because-
Hector Neris lasted quite a long time. I'm surprised. And maybe these guys were looking for 2 and 20 and things of that nature. But man, I when you look at, I mean, sure, you can hand the ball to David Robertson and kind of know what you're going to get. But would you rather hand it to Robertson or Maton? Like, I don't know that there's really that much of a difference. And it seemed like the frenzy over David Robertson was significantly greater than Maton, and I don't really understand that one. That's a good one because Tampa's either going to be in it, and it's a great point, Joe. They do some things with pitchers that I'm not saying no other team can do, but they have to be so creative in the way that they deploy guys that they tend to be very innovative in their usage of guys. And then the results, we look up at the end of the year and we're like, where the hell did this come from? And maybe Maton ends up turning out to be one of the elite relievers in the league from a value standpoint because of the way Tampa does. That's a really, really interesting pick there. My arm is Jack Flaherty. They gave him $14 million. It's a 1-year deal. He's 28 years old. And back in, I don't know, Joe, 2018, 2019, Flaherty was one of the top 15 starting pitchers in the National League over a 2-year period. Made 28 starts in 2018, made 33 starts in 2019, was very, very good, was striking out 30% of the batters he was facing. And then he started to get hurt. The shoulder started to bug him. The reason I like this deal is because late last year, I think we saw a little bit of an adjustment by Flaherty because he's not throwing 95, 96 anymore. He's more 93, 94, and he's throwing more cutters now and throwing fewer changeups. I think there's a chance we're going to see, I'd say maybe 85, 90% of the Jack Flaherty we saw back 5 years ago. And Detroit taking that chance, I just think it's brilliant. If Detroit's not, if they're not competing at the time, which they absolutely could, and that's the whole point in the first place, in that particular division, like we were just talking about, the White Sox are out. The Tigers probably still better than the Royals. Can they catch up to Cleveland and Minnesota? Maybe. There's some talent there in Detroit. And I just think Jack Flaherty was perfect. He set the Detroit Tigers up to either help them win, and if they're not competing, be a really, really interesting trade target for a contender to go out and trade for again, just like Baltimore did last year. There's risk here. There's certainly risk here. Maybe he gets hurt again. Maybe the shoulder doesn't allow him, to do some things. Maybe it doesn't allow him to start anymore. Maybe the durability is gone, but he did throw 144 innings last year. So I look at that as, all right, he's kind of working his way back from throwing 40, 78, 36 innings the previous 3 seasons, and he's ready to go 160 innings in 28 to 30 starts. I love that deal. You get a guy like that who has a couple of years where, he was almost a 5-win guy in 2019. If you can get even 80% of that back, it's going to be worth $14 million. I absolutely love that deal by Detroit.
Even if he's a number 4, even if you can get half of that value, if he's a 2.5-win pitcher, and he can just give you, like you said, that's the thing with Detroit is they need someone that can go 150 innings. They need someone that can post. They have not had that for the last 2 years. But if you can get a 2.5-win pitcher, a solid number 4 that gives you 30 starts, 28, 29 starts, that's going to be a bargain. $14 million bucks. And it's probably a good opportunity for Jack Flaherty as well to reestablish his value in the game because he is one of the more athletic, talented, cerebral pitchers. And for some reason, the fastball velocity has he's lost some of that over the last couple of years, but he's still young. I believe Jack Flaherty has more in the tank.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I'll go again really quick here and explain my Jeimer Candelario. This is all about the Reds potentially moving a younger player and being competitive this year. But Candelario gives them the opportunity. I'm not thinking of him as a third base guy. I'm thinking of him as more of a DH first base guy. But they have a young guy. They have a couple of young guys that also fit best at first base. It looks like Noelvi Marte is going to be their long-term third baseman. And they're probably just going to leave him there. But if Cincinnati stays in it and stays at least in the wild card hunt, but stays in it in the NL Central, and they want to move someone to go grab an arm, you're not going to be able to move Candelario for that. But you might be able to move one of these other guys like Spencer Steer, for example. Might be a guy another team's going to give up, 1 or 2 years of a mid-rotation starter for because you're going to control him for 5 years. I just think the Reds were thinking about this exact sort of situation when they signed Candelario. They signed him to a 3-year deal with a 4th-year option. So I think they were buying the potential, the opportunity for down the road, maybe this season, maybe next season, to trade somebody like Encarnacion Strand or Spencer Steer, because they already have another answer here at first base / DH and Candelaria. I loved it. As soon as they signed him, I was like, this is about maybe trading one of their first basemen. This is absolutely what that is. And they could do some damage this year. Some of those young players take another step forward, Joe.
Yeah, they've got a lot of. They're going to be another one of those teams that can go two different directions. If the Reds are winning, which I kind of think they're going to be a winner, I think they're going to be at least part of the conversation in the NL Central. If they're a winner, great. They've got all of the ammunition in the cupboard that they would ever need. If guys go down with injuries, they can backfill them. But if they're a team that kind of sputters out of the gates, and some of these young prospects take a little bit of a sophomore slump, they've got so many pieces that they can move to really bolster up a farm system that's still strong, but has pushed a lot of guys up into the major leagues over the last year and a half. So I think Cincinnati's in a really good place. The issue that I have with Cincinnati right now is they don't have a headliner. They've got a ton of really nice pieces. And it wouldn't surprise me if a guy or two guys, Ellie De La Cruz, Matt McClain, I'd take your pick, Spencer Steer. It wouldn't surprise me if one of these guys turns into a 4.5 win, 5 win player that, gets all-star nods. But that's what they need. Like, they moved to Luis Castillo, and now they don't have the stopper, right? Maybe that's Hunter Green. Maybe this is Hunter Green's coming out party year, but they're on the come up, man. Cincinnati looks good.
And they got a couple of young guys, Lodolo coming back, Brandon Williamson, Connor Phillips from the trades with Seattle. Obviously Hunter Green you mentioned, but they did sign Frankie Montas too. I liked that as well. That would be kind of an honorable mention for me. Who's your second one?
Second, I'm going to go pitcher again, and it worries me that this is actually going to take place. I think the Dodgers are going to do it again, man. So they bring in Ricky Vanasco, who I loved Ricky Vanasco as the prospect with the Rangers. He could never find the strike zone. Never could find the strike zone. And last year, he just was up and down with injuries all year, but still over 32 innings last year with Texas and the Dodgers. I mean, I guess this is more of a re-sign than it is anything, but he spent almost the entire year with Texas. 32 innings, 45 strikeouts, and 14 walks. This is a guy that was up to 100 with an 85-mile-an-hour curveball, an 88-mile-an-hour slider. He could throw an 84, 85-mile-an-hour changeup that he didn't really have any idea where it's going. I don't know what they're going to do with Ricky Vanasco. Like, I kind of think this is the point of his career. I think he's 25 now. Like, this is probably the point in Ricky Vanasco's career where he's a reliever. Like, you just kind of give up on it, and, he's not Nathan Eovaldi, and he's a reliever. And I think if they decide to just go that route, I mean, Ricky Vanasco could be a high leverage guy this year if he's right back healthy. So yeah, kind of a re-signing, but I kind of consider it a new guy on a new team because it was only 2 months.
Yeah, I get that.
And he's basically a minor leaguer too.
Was he a minor league free agent? It's been around a while.
No, I don't think he was a minor league free agent. He's just always been a minor leaguer, but they signed him to a major league 40-man deal.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that speaks volumes. They signed
when
him
did he
to a
start
40-man
throwing that
deal.
hard, by the way? Because when he was drafted, what was that, 17 when he was drafted? And he was drafted late, too. That was a day 3 guy, right?
Vanasco blew up at the 2020 camps. What were those things called? The alt-site camps. Like, his velo just exploded. And then 21, he was living in the mid-90s. And then I remember toward the end of 21, or maybe it was spring training 22, he touched 100. And it wasn't just the fastball. The kid was always like this super athlete. But it wasn't just the fastball. Like, all of the breaking balls ticked up 3 or 4 miles an hour. And he was just throwing, 3 pitches that legitimately could be 6s. But he just never knew where any of it was going. So I'm excited. That's another guy that I think could be like the next Pierce Johnson. Like, he pops up out of nowhere as a 26-year-old, and now he's an 8th inning guy for a World Series contender.
Just make it easy on him. Just throw him in the bullpen, throw your 2 favorite pitches, and run with it. Yeah, I like that. My last one is Lance Lynn. Joe, doesn't it
Mm.
seem like Lance Lynn is about 49 years old? It seems like Lance Lynn has been around for 20 years, but he's just 36. Obviously, big guy, didn't have a good year last year, but he was a 2-win guy in 2022. He was a 4-win pitcher in 2021. Obviously, far cry from the Cy Young-esque level that year he had back in Texas, and he had a bunch of 3-win years in St. Louis. But he's back in St. Louis, and I really like his chances to go out there and just be himself after what he learned about himself last year to start the season and what he learned in Los Angeles with the Dodgers. I think he's got a chance to be another 2, kind of surprise some people, 2.5 wins. He threw 180 plus innings last year as a 35-year-old dude. He turned 36 in May, and they only gave him 1 year and $11 million. There's a club option there, but $11 million. I think this is going to pay dividends for the St. Louis Cardinals.
You and I agreed when the Cardinals went out of their way to be the first team to take guys off the market, and it was the public narrative on MLB Network and Twitter and all these cesspools was, okay, yeah, the Cardinals are addressing their pitching needs, but they're literally going out and getting the highest ERA and the highest home run rate on the free agent market. Lance Lynn strikes me as the type of guy that just won't allow his career to go that direction. He won't allow himself to, and I was wrong about Mad Bum. I mean, Mad Bum fell apart very fast. I thought it was the same type of thing with Mad Bum, but I just have a hard time seeing Lance Lynn fall off a cliff like this. And, I know it's kind of a proxy comment, but Kyle Gibson is the exact same way. Like, he's going to be valuable, and you supplement that with Sonny Gray, and I love what the Cardinals did this offseason, and I really think it's gone under the radar.
Yeah, to see Lance Lynn, if you're into pitch values at all, like StatCast pitch values, pitch info, pitch values, you can get those at Fangraphs. It'll tell you that the thing that changed most the last couple of years with Lance Lynn was nothing, was just a little bit here and there. Yeah, he kind of switched from the four-seamer to the sinker a little bit. But in terms of pitch value, it's just a little tiny bit here and there. It's the curveball just a little less value in 2024 or 2023 versus 21 and 22. The changeup, a little less value. The cutter, a little less value. It's like it seems like in many, many ways, with at least 3, maybe even all of his pitches, he was just a little off. He's still throwing his average fastball 92.6 miles an hour. It just seems like there's just a little bit of an adjustment here. And I think of Lance Lynn as the quintessential pitcher. He's never been a guy to blow, guys away with 99. I mean, he did used to throw a little harder, 93, 94, 95. Yeah, I like this. I like the chances that this is at least a value at $11 million. And to be honest with you, I think the riskiest move, the one I like the least anyway, is the Sonny Gray deal. I know he only got 3 and 75. That's the one I like the least. I like the Gibson one. I like the Lance Lynn get. They still have Miles Mikolas there. I don't know how that's going to turn out, but I really like the Lance Lynn. I thought he was going back to the Dodgers, but the Dodgers obviously had other plans, Joe.
Yeah, no, they decided to spend $5 billion on other players. I think you and I would both agree that if you viewed those 3 pitchers as a package deal, as a trio, it's a B plus. Like that's a really good way about going. Sonny Gray deal, a B. And then maybe they're all 3 of them are just Bs, but it might end up being a B plus. That's the type of rotation that I think takes you to, surprisingly takes you to an NLCS.
I find it fascinating, Joe, that we're seeing this a little bit more. We're seeing, because this used to happen, and I know we're from a little bit different eras, but you used to see this more in the 80s and 90s than in the 2000s.
Yeah.
Guys that are 33, 34, 35 years old having career years. Well, that was Sonny Gray at 34 years old. That's Sonny Gray. I don't know what that means for this coming season or the seasons after that, but he had a great year. I can't remember exactly where he finished in the American League Cy Young voting, but he was legit in the running all year. He was that good. If he's even 75, 80, 85% of that, he's going to be worth the 3.75 over the next 3 years. So really interesting what the Cardinals are doing. Here's the thing. We're going to go through all this just really quickly. Can the Cardinals win that division?
Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Without I don't even question it. Yes.
Yeah. They went out and didn't even spend a ton of money. They did almost nothing with their position players. And they've turned their team into, well, I mean, let's look at what they did last year. They were the worst team in the National League Central. 71 and 91. And now we're looking at them like, yeah, I get it. You had Sonny Gray, you had a little depth, you get a Lance Lynn and a Kyle Gibson. You hope guys like, maybe Rom and Thompson take a step forward. You still like your bullpen, even if you don't love it. Maybe Steven Matz goes to the bullpen permanently. There was really nothing wrong with the offense to begin with. So here we are. And Milwaukee took a step back. So it's basically Cubs, Cardinals, Reds. That's probably where it ends at that point. I don't think Pittsburgh's going to contend in 2024. Yeah. Pretty remarkable that you can go out in a division in Major League Baseball in a major professional sport and add one really good pitcher and two middling guys that you're not really sure how they're going to go, but they're trending in the wrong direction, and go from 71 wins to a team that can win the division. I just find it fascinating. Freaking fascinating.
What teams kind of like what you mentioned with teams of the 90s too. Teams of the 90s paid for workhorses. They paid for guys that were going to post up 200 innings, and they paid for guys that were going to set a tone in the clubhouse. Like, that was a big thing. There were pitchers that pitched till they were 37, 38, 39 that were not good, but they continued to get contracts because they set a culture, they set a tone, they set accountability, expectations, responsibility for putting in the work. And I think every single one of those three guys that they brought in St. Louis is going to contribute to that narrative. But they also needed pitching. So
yeah. Before we move on from the Cardinals really quick, Nolan Arenado. Nolan Arenado did not have a great year last year. It wasn't terrible. Things were a little bit different. Didn't swing and miss a bunch more, or things were it was just a weird year for him. 266, 315, 459, 26 home runs in 144 games. He was a 2.5 win player. I keep getting asked, mostly from a fantasy standpoint, but I keep getting asked, is Nolan Arenado done? I go, well, he might be done putting up 6 and 7 win seasons. He did that 3 times in Colorado, 4 times in Colorado, and his second year in St. Louis. But I look at Arenado and say, unless you're telling me at 32, he'll be 33 in April, that he's hurt and there's some sort of recurring thing going on there with injury. Like, this is a guy that's absolutely, positively, without question, getting back to the 3.5, 4 win range. Am I nuts for thinking that?
No, I mean, St. Louis is kind of like Chicago last year. Like, the whole thing fell apart. And even guys with the wherewithal, like Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, and some of the starting pitcher, Yachty, like some of the guys that were on that roster, everybody regressed because it was just a cultural thing. I mean, and maybe this is a managerial issue with both of these teams, but when the whole team is playing to 70% of what you expected them to, it goes beyond the players.
Yeah, it was weird. I'd be a little bit more worried about Paul Goldschmidt just because he's older. No other reason, but just he's older. Yeah, and he didn't have a great year last year either. But that'd be the only thing there. 33 from Arenado doesn't scare me at all. Under the radar free agent. Got any more? Because
I got one more.
Got one more.
I got a bet. How about Joey Wendell for $2 million to the Mets? How about going and spending $2 million at the Dollar Tree to replace Jeff McNeil, or to ensure Jeff McNeil? How about going and getting Kmart Luis Arias and Joey Wendell? I love it. You know what you're going to get with Joey Wendell.
I think you. I don't. Well, I mean, if you do, you probably don't like it.
No.
I mean, this is a guy who was worth negative wins above replacement last year.
What was he in 2021 and 2022? He's not old.
He was a 1-win player in 2022. He was a 3-win player in 2021 in Tampa. They're looking for a little bit of a bounce back.
Hey, all I'm saying is
33 years old.
you can do worse at the utility position than Joey Wendell, and I don't buy for a second, considering like quite literally the type of player that he is. He's
Mhm.
not a swing and miss guy. He's not an exit velo guy. He's not a physical tools guy. Like if you ever expected a bounce back from any type of archetype, like it's Joey Wendell. And
Sure.
so I don't
I
even
mean,
think he shouldn't play 120 games, but if you throw him out there 65, 70 times at second and third base, you could do worse.
I think you just nailed it on the head, Joe. I think the problem with Wendell was in Miami, he was asked to play a little too much. He played 112 games in 2023 because he pretty much had to. They had injuries and performance issues, and he just kept going. Maybe the Mets, because of who else they have in their organization and on their roster, they're able to protect him a little bit and use
Yeah.
him truly as a part-time guy, and he only plays 70 games. Completely different. I mean, he's a left-handed batter. He's always hit righty. Well, except for last year. Oddly, he had reverse splits, but for his career, pretty significantly better against right-handed pitching, which is totally normal. Maybe that's just what he is. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, he's putting up a 100 WRC plus against right-handed pitching, and you'll take that all day off the bench. So I like
Hey,
that one.
speaking of the Joey Wendell types, has Tony Kemp signed anywhere yet?
That's a good question. Not off the top of my head. I'll look it
I
up.
don't think he has either. That's another scrappy utility player that really you can do. I mean, maybe it's just that he blisters Seattle. I mean, that guy just blisters Seattle, and he doesn't really do anything against anyone else. But
Yeah,
he,
he has not signed. Tony Kemp, second base, outfield, can certainly run. Just turned 32 on Halloween. Had a terrible 2023, but he
yeah,
was a 1.5 win player in 22. He was a 3-win player in 2021. He'll make a bunch of contact and he'll draw walks. And he can run. He stole 26 bags combined the last 2 years.
you give him $2.5 million to be your 26th man, right?
Absolutely. Did you say Wendell got 2 million?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd give Kemp about the same. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
Yep, left-hand batter, right-hand thrower, play a little second, play a little outfield, pinch run. Yeah, somebody's gonna pick him up. Somebody's gonna give him a couple $1,000,000. Maybe he's holding out for. I imagine because if I'm Tony Kemp, Joe, I'm like I'm a year and a half younger than that Joey Wendell dude, and he just got 2 million. I'm getting at least 2.1. That's what I'd be thinking right now if I was Tony Kemp.
Yeah,
I've been better
that's a
than Joey Wendell.
weird market to set, but
I
sure.
am, but that's what I'd be doing if I was Tony Kemp. Well, Joey Wendell just got 2.1 from the Met or 2 from the Mets. I'm getting 2.1 or I'm done. That would be my stance until somebody calls my bluff. Then I'm like, all right, I'll take 1.8. Good stuff there. Let's talk draft before we go. The one of the more interesting things to me about covering the draft, paying attention to that, and really baseball in general, sports in general, is the differing opinions you get. One big thing I'm into all not all the drafts. I love the NFL draft because college football is my second favorite sport. So this is about college football players talking about NFL draft, and you hear this guy's opinion on this player. You get Matt Miller or Jordan Reed over here, and you get Doug Farrar over here, and you get, Todd McShay and Mel Kiper. And, you get just a bunch of, you get Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks. Hey, I scouted this player, and here's what you just get a bunch of different, opinions. The same thing is true for the MLB draft. And I just thought, hey, what areas, because I used to think about this too. Working with Keith Law, and I'd be like, why does Keith think X about this player? And everyone else seems to think Y. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I guess we'll find out in 5 years. And then most of the time, Joe, I got to be honest with you, nobody was right. Nobody was right.
That is the truth.
Keith wasn't really right, and everybody else wasn't really wrong. It was just kind of somewhere in the middle. But I'm curious because your nose is to the grindstone here, particularly with the 24 class, but with all the classes. But thinking about the draft in front of us, do you have a belief, an opinion, a stance, a set of analyses where you come to one conclusion, at least at this point, the closest thing you can come to, resembling a conclusion where it's just quite different from the rest of the industry, the consensus of the rest of the industry? I'm curious what those are. There are a couple that you can tell us about a player or the strength of the draft or something where here's where you are and everyone else seems to be somewhere else?
Yeah, I think every publication, evaluator, writer, online scout, whatever you want to call them, is going to have guys that, they hitch their wagon to. I think with this, with this 24 class, I think I'm doing a lot more projecting out than I am living off of 2023's numbers,
Mhm.
because that's what this is about, right? It's like, what is
Sure.
this going to look like in 5 years? And I think, the guy that stands out on our board or my board, or it's the FSS Plus board. The guy that stands out the most is probably Carson Benj, the outfielder, right-handed pitcher at Oklahoma State. I've got him at 12. I got him getting about $4.5 million. And if you go to other publications, you'll find him, like 30 to 60.
Okay.
I just believe, I mean, listen, this kid is 6'2.5", 180 pounds. Like, in a draft that's full of guys that are physically maxed, this is a left-handed hitter with lightning quick hands, bordering on elite chase rates, tons of projection, a 70 grade arm in the field, and a 55 runner. I just, his thing last year was Carson Benj posted really, really high ground ball rates, and that's going to be an issue at the next level. But if you take that away and you look at just the physical tools, it's hard for me to see a whole lot of players in the first round that I would rather have in 2027 than Carson Benj. So I'll die on that hill, at least until week 2, when I'll change my opinion.
So you have him at 12. So here's, I think we talked about this last year too. I'll say fall for that's not the best way to put this, but I don't really care all that much about the two-way thing. I just don't.
Me either.
Tell me, is Benj a center fielder? Is this a guy who probably ends up in center field?
No.
Okay, so this is a corner guy. Okay, now we have a problem, right? Like traditionally, we have a problem. We don't necessarily, if he's going to go out there and hit 350, I don't really care how many, and put up a 430 OBP. I don't really care how many home runs he hits. But now we have a problem from a traditional scouting standpoint, at least when you're trying to put together a team. Guys in the corners, you want them to hit for power, obviously. And he's hitting a lot of ground balls, and I think he had 24 extra base hits last year at Oklahoma State. So you're thinking, though, that player, the guy that hit, 340 last year with a 470 OBP and just 7 home runs in 60 games at Oklahoma State, you're just thinking we're going to see a different guy. You're not saying that guy's the 12th best player. You're thinking this year's version is just different.
No, I mean, it is near top of the charts. Like, it's not Tommy White, it's not Nick Kurtz, but the exit velo data shows that this is every bit a plus raw power guy. Mm-hmm. He's got fast hands. He's got a comfortable 15 pounds ahead of him. He can run. He can throw. Everybody, all the publications, and this guy's a future stars guy, so I mean this respectfully. Everybody points to Braden Montgomery as, wow, it's an 80 arm in right field and raw power, and crazy. Sure. Carson Benj made more contact last year, had less chase rate last year, and had equal exit velocity data last year. Unfortunately, he just hit the ball on the ground a whole bunch. Sure. I think they're incredibly similar players. I just think Braden Montgomery has been a physically developed version of Carson Benj going back to like his junior year of high school. So I think he's going to blossom, and you're probably going to see a similar slash, like a 340, like a 340, 430, 580 slash. But I think you're going to see 16 to 20 home runs. And that puts him neck and, I mean, that's a horse race with Braden Montgomery to see who the better player is.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're both in this class. You didn't take a guy from a completely different class. You have Montgomery at 16 right now, transferred to Texas A&M. Obviously full of tools, but it sounds like Carson Benj full of tools as well. Now he's up to the mid-90s and beyond when he does pitch. So the arm strength is there, even if he's not necessarily a pitcher at the next level. Left-handed bat, I like that. Even though he's a right-handed thrower. He said he was like 6'2", 185, 190, something like that.
Not even 6'2", 180.
So is this a guy, what kind of raw speed are we talking about here too?
55. I mean, he stole, let me go back and look. He can
Okay.
run. He can run. He can play an above average right field, and if you throw the arm into the
Mhm.
glove grade consideration, he's going to be a valuable right fielder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here's like the
Fun.
thing with Benj, man, is he wasn't recruited as a junior in high school. He wasn't really recruited. He's recruited more as a pitcher
Mhm.
in high school as a senior, and he was up to like 92, and there were a couple teams on him. Uh, then he blows out, so he misses 2022. Comes back in 2023. Nobody knows who this guy is as a bat, and he hits at Oklahoma State. He hits 380 with a low strikeout percentage, low chase percentage, big exit velos, a long, projectable frame, good body guy. Like this is for me. This is what they look like.
That's a fun player. That's a fun player. So if you're out there and you're looking for players to watch, you're looking for developments. We talked a couple of weeks ago about some things Joe wanted to see from certain players that were, top 50, top 100 guys. This is kind of the same idea with Benj. Let's see if he can turn some of those ground balls into line drives and maybe even create some backspin and hit the ball out of the yard a little bit. And if you start seeing that, that number 12 ranking is going to look really, really good. This is fun. Uh, I see some differences here when I'm looking at your board here, Joe. I'm curious who your next guy is, or what your next kind of industry difference is. Let's pick a fight with the rest of the industry for crying out loud.
Okay, yeah, that'll go well.
Like why not? Like rest. But here's the great thing about it: we're just picking a fight with the industry. We're not picking a fight with any individual. They're not going to care. They'll be like, he's not talking to me, but we're absolutely talking to you. What else you got here? What else fits here? Because Carson Bench, I literally wrote his name down and he's on my calendar now.
Yeah, the other one is, I guess it's another kind of model darling, Virginia catcher Ethan Anderson.
Mhm.
I'm huge on Ethan Anderson. So for one, he will not be 21 years old at the draft. He will be 20 and 9 months. Now, keep in mind what I just said. Catcher at Virginia, Ethan Anderson. He
Mhm.
hasn't caught in the first 2 years because they had Kyle Teal, who
Mhm.
was a monster back there, both athletically and with the bat. So why would you ever take him out? Let me give you a snapshot of Ethan Anderson's amateur career. As a 17-year-old who had not yet enrolled in college in the Florida Colts the Futures Collegiate Baseball League, Wood Bat League. As a 17-year-old, he hits 427, 522, 667 in 29 games with 5 homers against college pitching.
Huh.
2022, as an 18-year-old in the ACC, 50 games, 302, 403, 497, 5 homers. In both of these seasons, he almost had as many walks as strikeouts. Last year, as a DH first baseman, 65 games, 375, 469, 649, 15 homers, and 10 more walks than he had strikeouts. This is the guy that is now going to be catching full time, or at least, get 40 games
Mhm.
for Virginia this year. The scouts that I've talked to really believe it could be a 5 glove. And if it's even a
Huh.
platoon defensive catcher, if it's even a platoon, left-handed stick, 6'2", 215. Like if this is a guy that hits, he could take a step back. If he hits 340, 440, 580 in the ACC this
The
year with
first round
15,
guy though.
it's a first round
Yeah.
guy. And he's never stopped hitting at every stage. And he won't be 21. If he can prove he can catch, and I think that's the important part, is he's only caught 9 games in 2
Mhm.
seasons.
Mhm.
If he proves he can catch, Ethan Anderson is going to be a first round pick. I didn't
Wow.
even, yeah, I mean, I didn't even tell you what he did at Harwich on the Cape with a wooden bat. That was a bit more of a struggle. I mean,
Mhm.
91 plate appearances with the wood bat, terribly foggy and cold this summer, but he had 2 home runs there, 6 walks. I mean, he did only post a 195 average, so actually not anything to write home about, but
It's like 20
um,
games though. Yeah.
it's like 20 games.
Mm.
Yeah, so
Doesn't wipe out
I'm all
everything else
over it.
he did. So
I'm
we're
all over it.
talking
Yeah.
about we're talking, I don't know. Does that remind you of anybody, by the way? He's a legit switch hitter, right?
Yeah, I don't know who it would remind me of. Do you have anybody in mind, like right away, that comes to mind?
Well, I got a question. I haven't seen him. So tell me what kind of athlete he is.
It's not great. I mean, he's probably a 40 athlete. He's a 40 runner. Like he's not going to provide much value on the basis. He's a high instincts guy. Like he's grabbed a
Mhm.
couple bags in his career and he's got an average arm, but he's not a good enough athlete to have even played the outfield at Virginia. And
Sure.
Virginia isn't exactly chock full of athletes. So they've got some good guys, but they had a ton of just true freshmen in the outfield last year.
Right. So this is a mostly from an athletic standpoint. This is a guy that's if he doesn't catch, he's mostly a has he played a bunch of first base? Because I don't like to, I'm a Ron Washington, believer. I don't want to just assume a guy can play first base like
He
automatically,
got
but he's
yeah.
he's got some at bats, so he's DHing or playing first base, right?
I mean, he played 65 games at first base last year, and he played exclusively at first base on the
Mhm.
Cape this past summer. So nobody got a chance to see him behind the plate on the Cape, which I think was a bit of a disservice by Harwich.
Mhm.
But that's not going to be the case at Virginia.
I don't know. You telling me about the player, and I think of a bunch of guys. I can't really think of one. Um, that fits. But think about guys like Todd Hundley's best years. Now, they're a little bit different physically, but Todd Hundley's best years. That's what I think about. And Todd Hundley actually had a pretty darn good career. But you think of Todd Hundley's best years. He was a 4.7 win catcher for the Mets, 260, 360, 550 with the 40 bombs. Back when 96, when power went crazy, and then he basically did the same thing the next year. But that seems to be, hit 260, get on base 35, 36% of the time, 36% of the time, hit 25, 30 home runs. Does that sound completely out? To be honest, that sounds a little bit like Cal Raleigh right now.
I mean, if I'm being like, I'll dial it back a little bit. I don't know if he's got the raw power that some of those guys you mentioned. Yeah, I think he's more of a hitter than he is a
Mhm.
power hitter. Like I think he's probably going to be a guy that hits 15 to 18 home runs at his peak at the big
Mhm.
league. It's not enormous bat speed, but that first part that you mentioned, like if you can find a guy that can actually catch and post you a 265, 340, 430 line, come on.
It's absolutely insane.
It's
That's
I
huge. This is why
yeah,
guys like
it's
Kyle Teal go underdrafted.
mhm.
Because now it's like, well, teams start to overthink it a little bit. It's like, well, yeah, he can catch, but do we want to kind of waste him at catcher and wear him down? So, like, teams start having talks about where else can the guy play. Geez, guys, like the guy can catch, use him at catcher, and then make the decision later. You only have to think about it for the first 6 years anyway. I don't know what you're doing. And maybe Ethan Anderson's another one of those guys. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe he can catch a little now, but when he's 30 or 29, maybe it doesn't look great. Who cares?
You
Who
know what a
cares?
scout told me about Kyle Teal last year? He
Mm,
said, you can include Dylan Cruz, you can include Wyatt Langford. I don't care. You can include the whole class. Kyle Teal probably has the easiest path to becoming a 4-win player as any of them.
mhm,
Because, I mean, he's a catcher that can run
mhm,
with power, that can throw guys out like 5 tools behind the plate. And that's what
mhm.
Seattle's dreaming on with Harry Ford. And
Sure. Yep.
it's rare.
Yep. Yep. That's a fun player, Ethan Anderson. So we got Carson Bench, Ethan Anderson. Anything else stand out?
I that's pretty much the gist of it. I'm a little bit more bullish on a couple of the high school pitchers. I like Levi Sterling. I've got him at 26. I think he's a SoCal kid that's young, long, up to 97 with 4 pitches and dynamic strike throwing ability. I'm 15 or so spots ahead of the industry on him, but um, Anderson and Benj are the ones that stand out, and I'll give kudos to Pipeline for being. I think they're the high man on Slade Caldwell right now
Mhm.
at 20. So I love Slade.
Yeah, I've noticed that a couple that you're higher on than most, like by 10 or 20 spots, and that may not mean a whole lot. But the East Carolina kid, I haven't seen him higher than maybe like maybe 30, 35. I think Pipeline has him in the mid 30s. You have him at 18. I can certainly see why you have him at 18, just reading your write up. 6'4, 230, touching 96, two breakers. Like there has a changeup. Like I get it. And East Carolina certainly has a track record. That's one, just from a player standpoint. Have you noticed a whole lot about like from a demographic standpoint at this point? And it's early, but we see rankings and there's lots of, talk, with the season, the D1 season starting next week. Have you noticed any differences in terms of like, um, who the number one pick's going to be or could be, or upside on Weatherholt, or, the strength of the prep class? Have you seen any significant differences there, or do you kind of sort of see eye to eye with the rest of the industry on things like that?
I honestly think, and in 6 or 7 years of doing this and publishing it, I think this is the first time that the industry as a whole is pretty much uniform on who the top three guys are. If the draft were today, who would go 1, 2, 3, or in any order? I think Connor Griffin is a guy that some people anticipate will be in that top three, top four conversation,
Mhm.
even though he's, in like the 6 to 12 range for a lot of people as we wait to see how things flesh out. I think the biggest thing with this draft right now that everybody has to wait for is, it's the first time I've seen this too, the amount of college arms at the top of this class with such enormous red flags and strike throwing ability. I've
Mhm.
never seen that with Hagen Smith and Marcus Morgan and Brody Brecht, and I've Jack Caglione, if you want to throw him in there. Like,
Mhm.
strike throwing ability at the top of this class is an enormous question mark, and everyone's just kind of waiting to see who survives the test of, did you take a step forward in that regard this spring?
Let me ask you one thing on that, because I see some of the guys on your list. Obviously, Brody Brecht, Chase Burns, um, Hagen Smith, the Arkansas lefty, who's obviously a lot of fun. Jonathan Santucci from Duke. There are enough guys in your top 20, top 25 from a college arm perspective that suggests if the Brecht Burns Smith group don't figure it out and do what scouts are hoping they do from a control standpoint, from a command standpoint, um, could we see somebody like a Santucci um, or even Josh Hartle or somebody like that end up being the first college arm off the board? Or are those top three guys pretty firmly the top three college arms, even if they don't sneak their way into the top 8 or so?
No, I think if Chase Burns repeats what he did last year or something similar, his
Mhm.
strikeout rate was low enough to where he could be the first college arm off the board. I think Brody Brecht could fall into the 20 to 40 range pretty
Mhm.
quickly. I think Hagen Smith could fall into the 20 to 40 range pretty quickly, but the guys that I think could jump, listen, I've known Josh Hartle going back to 2019. I've interviewed him 3 times. He's a terrific kid. I don't think there's much chance that he goes as the number one college arm just because of his velocity limitations.
Just not enough upside there.
There's just not enough stuff. Like, at
Mhm.
best, he's Jordan Wicks, I think. But you look at a guy like Matt Ager at UC Santa Barbara. There's an enormous up arrow next to his name right now. I've got him at 31. Wouldn't surprise me if he went 15. Michael Massey at Wake Forest. It's a guy that pitched, behind some of the best college arms in the sport over the last couple of years. He's going to be like the Saturday guy this year. He's a guy that could go in the top 10 to 15. So I think the guys that you look out for are Massey and Ager. And I think you look at Brecht and you look at Hagen Smith as guys that could tumble. And Savage, I think college aren't like, there's just too many teams that try to get pitching value out of the draft that makes me think that Trey Savage is going to go in the top like 30 to 35 picks. And Santucci's the same way. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, this is definitely like the White Sox, like the Cardinal. Like, there the Tigers. There are enough teams that just
Sure.
they want that floor. They want to build out a farm that way.
Is there a clear number one prep arm for you at this point, at this stage in things, in this particular class?
Not really, man. They've all got warts.
Mhm.
Cam Caminiti is 19 for me. Ton of polish, 3 breaking balls, but he can't spin the ball at all. Like, his breaking ball is
Mhm.
like 2,100 RPMs. It's like Patrick Corbin, and you see Patrick Corbin as a guy who had a high flash that got him a big contract, but when the stuff peters off, you're on a razor's edge. Levi Sterling is probably my favorite high school arm, even though it's a little bit less refined. Then you got guys like Bryce Rayner, and you got Joey Oakey and Ryan Sloan and Duncan Marston, who could all be the first pitcher off the board. They're all just further down the board for specific reasons, whether it be a third pitch, they don't have a long track record. Like Marston, we talked about him last week. This is his first time pitching since his freshman year in high school. Bryce Rayner's been a shortstop up until this point.
Right.
And Oki and Sloan they don't have the same type of physical frame and third pitch that the other guys do. So
I'm going to ask you this in 5 months again, and probably I'm going to ask you all of this stuff again in 5 months. But
can't wait to be wrong.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite player in this draft?
Oh, yeah. It's not even close. And this is not a marketing ploy. I love Slade Caldwell. I do.
Yeah.
I think he is everything.
I go.
He's everything that the game is all about, man. Like, he hustles. He's respectful. Everything is balls to the wall. He gets, he's 5'6", 5'7". Like, he gets more out of his frame than some of the guys that are a little bit more physically blessed. Yeah, I couldn't root for Slade any harder.
He's a first round guy, right?
I think so. I mean, I think the Drew Gilbert and Corbin Carroll comps are a little disingenuous because he is smaller, but it's hard to see Slade becoming an MVP type of a player, but it's also hard for me to find a route where Slade doesn't become a big league regular. He's just, he's the intangibles.
5'6", 180, all the makeup, all the good stuff. Left-handed bat, right? So quick out of the box.
More bat speed than Nick Madrigal. Take him 3.
And a significantly better swing. I've seen it myself. So let's get out of here if anybody wants to go there. Is he going to get drafted high enough? And again, I know we're 5 months out. Does he end up getting drafted high enough to keep him away from Ole Miss? Is anywhere in the first round going to be high enough? All right.
I think Slade and his family, I don't know who he's represented by, so I apologize whoever hears this. I think if Slade is thrown $2 million or more, he probably deserves 3.5. But if a guy that's 5'6" gets thrown $2 million in the draft, you don't go to Ole Miss, start your pro career, get your bag, and man,
get to the big leagues in 3 years and start making your agent.
He could be there in 2. Like, it's just it's also simple with Slade. It's short to the ball. He's gonna hit. So yeah.
And we're talking about a big time runner. We're talking about a 7 or an 8, right?
I don't think it's an 8, but it's probably a strong 6 with some 7 times in there.
Okay. And out of the box, left-handed swing, all that good stuff. Fun. Yeah, I figured that's where you were going to go, but I thought maybe you talked about Slade Caldwell enough to where you'd go in a completely
I'll stop now.
direction. So
No. Stop stroking his ego.
Don't do that. He's not listening to this. He's off playing ball.
I hope not.
The agent might listen to this, and if that's the case, call Joe. Don't call me.
Don't call me. Please don't call me.
I don't have anything to do with any of this. We're going to be asking this question all year, but I think what's fascinating about this class is the guy that a lot of people, not everyone necessarily, but the guy that a lot of people, including you in terms of your rankings right now, have as the best player in this class is a 5'10", 190-pound guy that's going to play shortstop in college for the first time, if I'm not mistaken. And he's probably more of a second base. Maybe if you want to stretch and make him a third baseman, but he's probably a second baseman. That to me is interesting in and of itself. Like, I understand the people that are out there saying, hey, I think Wake first baseman Nick Kurtz should probably and may probably be the first pick in the draft. I absolutely get that, because as we were talking about with the White Sox earlier, not that Weatherholt's not going to be whatever. Maybe he's a star. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying he's not going to be, but it's a little easier to see the impact with the bat with a guy like Kurtz. I just think heading into the season, that right there with 1 and 2, with those two guys, is fascinating enough. There's always these little narratives and these little stories to follow. And for me, that's the one I'm starting the season with, Joe.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people in the organizational scouting community rooting right now for Vance Honeycutt, rooting for Connor Griffin, rooting for, like Mike Sirota doesn't have the physical tools of the first two guys that I mentioned, but there are people that really want a definitive number one to come out of this. And if one doesn't show, it wouldn't surprise me if we went into the draft and, let's say Connor Griffin is 5 or 6 or 7 on boards. It wouldn't surprise me if he took a $750,000 haircut to go 1.
Right.
It just wouldn't.
I mean, I would.
I don't see it. There's not a definitive one this year.
I would.
I would.
I'll take that kind of a haircut. I mean,
Yeah.
get out of here. I mean, I'm only 6 feet and 187. I'm not 6'4" and 200 like Connor Griffin, but I'll take that kind of.
Honestly, man, I'd take day 3 money.
Absolutely. Give me a uniform and I'll take it and retire. That's all I need. That's all I need. Good stuff, man. As always. And we actually see at the beginning of the show, I'm really bad at this. At the beginning of the show, I estimated this is probably just going to be like an hour. This isn't going to be like an hour 10, hour 20. And here we are, hour 20. So I'm going to apologize to Joe because I kept him a lot longer than I thought. Apologize to the missus for me.
I will.
I'll
blame it on you.
But make sure you tell her you learned something today. Like you taught, but you learned something.
I can't. Do you understand? If I apologize to her and then lie to her, you're not making up any ground.
You learned today that Toad Suck Arkansas was real.
Oh yeah. If she sees Toad Suck in my cookies on Google Chrome, I'm going to be in trouble.
Oh, that's beautiful. All right, we will talk next week. It is opening day for the D1 season next week, so we'll probably try and get the show out on Thursday night next week if we can, instead of
let's do a little
Friday
preview
night.
of college baseball
absolutely.
next week.
Shoot, maybe we'll do it a day early. I don't know what you're doing Wednesday, but maybe Wednesday's the day we try to do it. I'll check in with you. We'll see what we can do. We'll figure it out.
Cool.
We'll talk next week. This has been the FSS Plus podcast.
So just chill till the next episode.